Oh, hi, hello. This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am your host, Liv. She who now has conversations that go so far beyond the realm of myth that the podcast name could rightfully be questioned. And yet here we are. I'm not changing anything. And like that little joke / accurate depiction of the podcast is actually irrelevant today, because while this episode is diving in to Athenian politics and gender and the roles of women, particularly those who were living in Athens but were not technically Athenian, it also revolves around a certain man's mythology and how a certain city used and developed it to enhance their own presence and dominance in the Mediterranean. Yes, Theseus is involved in today's episode. Today, I spoke with Dr. Rebecca Futo Kennedy, who specializes in, among other things, immigrant women in classical Athens. Fucking cool. She and I actually met up for a drink in Athens a while back, and I have been eagerly awaiting this conversation ever since. We talk about Theseus, not so much the man as the political machinations that existed within him and his mythology. Because unlike other heroes, Theseus is almost inherently political, and gods, does that make him interesting amongst all of the horror associated with him. We talked about immigration in Athens, both after the Persian Wars and then again after the Peloponnesian War, and how those wars and the time periods influenced who did and did not get to call themselves Athenian officially, but particularly how that affected women. Duh. Even how some women used it to their advantage, or at least they did what they could to enjoy the hell out of their lives, the ones that they got to have. Party girls of Athens, if you will. And we just talked about Greece and Athens, generally, because we both love both. This episode is absolutely fascinating, and I'm just so thrilled with episodes like it. The way that these conversations, I don't know, through them I've been able to share the ways that mythology ties directly into history in the ancient world, the way that the two are just connected in this way that is so often difficult to comprehend if you're just reading a bit of mythology. It is what I love most about the ancient world. You know, the reality behind the myths, the purpose behind them, the very real people that they affected. And at the risk of rambling about this further, let's just dive right in. Conversations, the politics of mythology, foreigners and party girls of classical Athens, with Dr. Rebecca Futo Kennedy. Obviously, mythology is my thing, and Athenian mythology is so interesting because it's so, you were just saying before we kind of started fully recording, that it's so tied together with their national identity, and so much of it seems to come later and be so on purpose and intentional in a way that so much of Greek mythology isn't, and that's what it's so interesting. So yes, this myth of autochthony, I've told it before, on the show. So I also recently had to explain it in a Patreon episode I did about Hephaestus, where people asked me questions. So the gist of it being, I'm not going to try to say it here. I'm going to put it in the introduction. That's what I'm going to do. But yes,
that's my favorite myth to tell.
Great.
I tell it in classes, and the students are like, "This is their national identity myth." I'm like, "Yeah, basically."
Well,
this is it.
And then tying that,
they tie it into sacred spaces, and they build buildings representing it.
So do they have a lot of visual representation of the Hephaestus and Athena interaction, I'm going to call it?
Well, no, it's the birth of Erechtheus.
Yeah, but the lead up to
right.
Erechtheus.
And Hephaestus and Athena are always there, sort of partnered.
Right. I love it.
So it's alluded to, but it's not made obvious.
Right.
Right.
We don't need to see it.
No one needs to see that. But I mean, I would love to see a vase that has Athena holding, like, disgustedly holding a tuft of wool, you know, like,
Yeah,
it would be
like
really great.
looking at her leg, like, ugh.
Just like, yeah, I would love that, but I don't know of one. Like, if there is one, maybe Kate Topper knows. You know?
Incredible. Well, and I also like, and I don't want to like start onto too many things, but I also am deeply fascinated by the Theseus myth.
Yeah.
And how they kind of created him for the same reason.
Yeah, there's so much of the way he gets elevated over the course of the 5th century. And his story is intimately tied into the sort of anti-immigrant and negative foreign women stories.
Yeah. Medea,
that
right?
we see in, well, he's that's the earliest. They're vase images of him and Medea. Like, the earliest representations of Medea in Athenian context is on vases of her trying to poison Theseus.
Really?
Yeah. But we're also looking at the Hippolytus story, right, with Phaedra. And then you're also looking at Euripides' version of the suppliants, which is actually the children of the 7 against Thebes. And Theseus doesn't want to let them in the city as suppliants. He wants to reject them.
Right.
And he has this line in there where he's like, I can't even believe that you guys intermarried with, you know, foreigners and dirtied your bloodline. And his mom scolds him because, of course, his mom is like, sweetie, you know, you're not a pure Athenian either. So there's all these, like, he shows up in the later 5th century, sort of from the 430s onward, sort of in tragedies that are all about sort of supplication and immigration, or foreignness, foreign contamination. But in the earliest versions of the story, it's Medea coming in trying to poison him.
Right. I love that. So so
there's a lot of that stuff going on.
So to pull it back for the listeners, like, so what, you know, can you give us like a bit of a background on like what is happening in Athens that is causing them to have this kind of influx in commentary on immigration? Yeah.
So most people who know anything about Greek history know about the Persian Wars, which everyone thinks ended in like 478, 479 with the battles of Plataea, Salamis, and then Plataea. But there wasn't actually a peace treaty until, if there was one, it happened in like, you know, 447 or something like that. But that treaty is even disputed. But so what did happen, though, is that the Persians sort of left their aspirations of taking mainland Greece behind. And what this wars did was the Athenians, under the sort of shadow of the Persian Wars, built a massive navy. And with that massive navy, they became the dominant sea power in the Aegean. There had been some competitors earlier, Corinth, for example, and then Aegina, Chios, Samos in the islands, and Lesbos in the islands. But that war really, because Athens was ground zero, they built 300 triremes, which is like the biggest fleet. Even if they didn't have them all on the sea at the same time, they built that many to be able to rotate it.
Wow.
I think the next biggest was something like Lesbos or something, had like 40 something.
Jesus. Okay. Yeah. Big difference.
so it was a massive difference if you're able to have 200 warships in the water at all times. Part of it was its desire to protect its the grain trade, which was coming down from the Black Sea. And so as part of the impetus, though, of the Persian Wars is that once the sort of main battles on the mainland of Greece left, the Athenians started moving to use their navy to push the Persians back out of the islands and back into Asia Minor, and then also even to claim territory. And what happened is that they set themselves up as the liberators, but pretty much within a decade, by I think the earliest evidence we have for the Athenians sort of flipping from liberators to the new enslavers, so the new imperialists, is like 472, with the island of Thasos, and then shortly thereafter the island of the Phaselis decree is an inscription that shows a treaty that they've signed that makes them subordinates of the Athenians, and they're not allowed to like leave their grouping. They forged something in 478 called the Delian League. which is they all get together on the sacred island of Delos, and they sign a treaty that basically Athens will save them and protect them. So Athens uses this as a way to gain really strong control of the Mediterranean, of the Aegean part of the Mediterranean. By the 450s, they are forcing their allies to use their coinage, right? So it's about money, it's about trade routes, it's about power. But because Athens becomes this major player, they become a major, the major sort of economic hub in the mainland. It's no longer Corinth. It's like, so immigrants are flooding into Athens because that is where all the ships are. That's where all the building activity starts happening. Even though they didn't start building on the Acropolis until 447, they started building in the Agora in the 460s. And so craftsmen are being brought in from other places. So we have lots of people coming in to work. There's also, it's got 2 ports now in this period. So you have people coming in from Megara, from other places to just work. There's work, and there's a lot of merchants coming in. The Piraeus becomes a sort of major port. We actually have evidence in the archaeological record. If you go to the Piraeus Museum, which is sort of my favorite museum in Greece, they actually have the sort of weights and measure boards where you exchange your coinage and stuff.
Wow.
When you come into the port, things like this. And so this, because it becomes this huge hub, they start getting more and more influx of citizens or of immigrants. There's a lot of debate over the timing of all of this, but myself and some others, we argue that it was in the 460s that the Athenians decide that they need to start managing this population, and so they create a category in law called the metic, M-E-T-I-C, not M-E-D-I-C, just to clarify. There are many medics who are metics, but they are not the same thing. And so the metic is this sort of, it's an in-between the enslaved and the citizen. It's a free resident, but there are lots of restrictions on them, like they are not allowed to own property, they're not allowed to own buildings, they have to pay a special tax. That's the sort of defining feature of them. They pay a tax on their person. If you stay in the city for more than like a few weeks, like a merchant might pass through, right? Things like that. But if you're staying in the city for a longer period of time, then you have to pay this tax and register. And the penalties for not registering are actually to be sold into enslavement. So,
oh my gosh,
it's there are also privileges though. Like if you're a sort of wealthy metic, people like Lysias, the orator, later in the period, you can get special privileges, like you can get exemption from the tax, you can get the right to own land, sort of things like that. But for the most part, the poor immigrants, and particularly the women immigrants who come into the city, they cannot get these special exemptions. So that happens, we think, in the 460s. In the 451, the Athenians pass a law that is the first of its kind that we know of in the sort of Greek polis, which is they restrict citizenship to only people who have both a father and a mother who are Athenian. In most other places, as long as your father is an Athenian, or if your father is a citizen, then you're a citizen. Athens passes a double descent law. And this seems to represent an increase in anti-immigrant sentiment. And my argument has been that they start managing the population in the 460s. And once you start managing them and recognizing them as a distinctive population, you now engender prejudice. And so this prejudice sort of builds up to the desire for regulating them even further. But the problem is that immigrant women, foreign women in the city, can still marry citizens. So between the sort of 460s and 451, we have a whole series of foreign women who are marrying Athenian citizens, and some of them are very famous. And many of our sort of most famous people, like the general Cimon or the general Themistocles, or all these sort of guys, they're the daughters, they're the children of foreign mothers with Athenian citizens. So they're very wealthy, things like this.
Yeah.
So this law is passed, and there's a crackdown and a sort of separation. And the only targets for this law can be these foreign women, because the children of citizen women and foreign men were never allowed to be citizens. So it's only restricting these activities of these foreign women. So although previous scholars had thought, well, there weren't really that many women coming to the city for it to matter, there must have been enough for them to pass a law, right? And for them to have their own special tax category. The tax for a male medic and or one with or without a family was 12 drachma per year, and for a woman, independent woman, it was 6 drachma. So they had their own special tax code. So Benno Krieg has done like sort of a reassessment of the demographics, and I think if you say probably about 10% of the resident foreigner population was women in the 5th century, it's going to go up in the 4th century, and the laws are going to get even more draconian. So we have this sort of increase to the point where it sort of engenders a need to sort of manage the population, because they're not citizens and they're not slaves, and so but we have enough of them that they sort of, and they're mostly other Greeks, so they look like everybody else, right? And then you have people who are freed from enslavement going also into this population, so though nobody knows what to do, so they create a system. The system then seems to like mark them as a distinctive group, and then you pass a law restricting them even further in the 450s, and this continues on, and we actually start seeing references to it in Greek tragedies from the beginning of its formation. But starting after the passage of this law in 451, we start seeing more evidence of sort of negative representations of foreign women in Greek mythology, or Athenian specific mythology, and specifically on the tragic stage. And then when we get to the building programs that start in the 440s, as the Athenians become more clearly an empire and distinguishing themselves from other Greeks in a more harsh line, in their alliances with these other Greek cities and the way they treat other Greek cities, we see a much starker hardening of the lines between citizen and foreigner within the ideology of the city. So lots of Amazon vases start popping up, right? Yeah. And we start seeing things like these buildings, representations on the buildings of things like the myth of autochthony. And on vases, the myth of autochthony starts to really emerge in the 440s as a sort of Athenian national story. So then the Peloponnesian War comes, and all hell breaks loose. Everything changes. They have to loosen the laws because they need more citizen babies, and so they allow intermarriage. They allow the children of these foreign women to become citizens again but then in 403, when the war ends, they reinstitute the law.
Oh my God!
Much more harshly. So so like the first thing they do when they reestablish the democracy at the end of the war is they reenact their anti-immigration laws. So it's, and in some instances we actually see evidence in oratory from around the period that they blame some people were blaming the sort of relaxation of the laws for Athens' loss. Like they violated the purity. You see a lot of discourse of purity.
Oh gosh.
Both in the mythology, in the tragedies, and in these orations. Yeah. So it's all sort of wrapped up together, but it seems to have actually been, large influx of citizenships as the Athenians got really wealthy, and they were trying to figure out how to distribute these funds and who could have them and who couldn't. Right. Right. So they start, lots of immigrants coming in. They're bringing in foreign cults. Right. So we have the cult of Isis and the cult of Bendis from Thrace, like all getting established in the Piraeus in like the 440s and stuff. Like there's all this sort of influx. So there's a lot of anxiety. But there's also something to be said for the fear of resources, because they start paying citizens to attend the assembly. They start paying citizens to attend the theater. They start paying citizens to be on juries, and they're giving free distributions of grain to citizens. So how do you know who a citizen is? You got to be able to define it. Yeah. So that's it's very complicated. But what's really interesting about the Athenian example is how much evidence we have of how intertwined the sort of public, artistic, architectural, civic stuff is all, how intertwined it all is. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, just the way that their mythology, in certain cases, autochthony and Theseus, like, are so intentional, and then you can like tie them to these things happening. Like it makes it so unique compared to, the broader mythology of Greece. But at the same time, I think that often when a person is just coming to mythology as just like an interested, anyone kind of finding it, you don't realize the sort of complexities and the way that Athens influenced it. And I don't know. I don't even have like a point for this, but just is so fascinating to me the way that Theseus is like, and it's something I've tried to emphasize on the show. Like Theseus is like a creation for a purpose in a way that like Heracles is not, and it's so
He's actually the Athenian Heracles. Right?
Yeah, and they do it so.
I mean, and that's actually there's a really good book called The Athenian Experiment, written by Greg Anderson, where he actually looks at the creation of the Athenian democratic structure that we come to know of as the Athenian democracy, the sort of structure that gets put in place in 510, 509, between sort of 510 and 507, this sort of period in here where there's the overthrow of the Pisistratid government and then the installation of the democracy under Cleisthenes. And his argument, which I think is super interesting and correct, is he traces the rise of the sort of myths of the labors of Theseus to coincide with the creation of this new democratic system. And one of the things that's really interesting is because this is where we see the sort of earliest versions of Theseus as the Senoicizer. Senoicism, for your audience, if they are not familiar with that very commonly used word.
I'm like, I don't know what it is. Thank you for explaining.
So when one of the things that made Athens a superpower, what made them go from sort of like a backwater Greek polis to a military superpower within a sort of a decade, essentially, like 20-year period, right? Between 510, when the Pisistratids sort of were kicked out, and 590 or 490, when the Battle of Marathon takes place, something happens in Athens. And that something is the creation of the superpolis. So in many other polis, you have the city, and that's the polis. And then they might control surrounding territory, but the people in that surrounding territory aren't citizens in the same way. What happened in Attica is that the entire territory of Attica, they all became citizens in this new system with the creation of the deme structure. And so you have this sort of, they have these demes that they're like little counties within Attica, and they all get pulled into this new structure. And so they all are directly, able to participate in governance. They can all be elected to the council. They can all, be elected archon. And they create this really elaborate system. There's a really cool map that I show my students that was made by the American School of Classical Studies for the Agora publications that shows how the intricacy of sort of how they map this out. But it's called the Senoicism. It's what gives them the biggest manpower pool.
Right.
Of the other polis.
Yeah.
And they are all citizens. They're not like the Spartan army where you've got the Spartans and then you've got the perioikoi, sort of like the hanger arounds, right? And then the helots.
Yeah.
These all become citizens of Athens in this moment. And so it gives them this massive advantage in terms of manpower and also landed resources. And Theseus is elevated as the guy who does this. And not only that, is that the earliest evidence we have of his labors come from this same time period. And what's interesting is that because, of course, you have these much larger cities, these sort of could have been competing polis outside of Attica, cities like Rhamnus, for example, or Piraeus itself, these sort of little territories, Marathon, where the Temple of Nemesis was, you should have these all little sort of competing villages that could have been their own. And they have their own traditions and they had their own sort of structures of local governance. And one of the things that you see is the myths of Theseus, his labors, all take place in some of these major corners of the new Attic territory, as if they're giving them a national hero to buy into that has these deep connections to their own territory. So it gives them a sort of overarching, super myth, because they create 10 tribes as a part of the new democratic structure. And there's a member, each of the 10 heroes, the eponymous heroes, comes from one very powerful place in Attica that had a large polis, right? A large potential polis.
Right.
But that Attica brought it in and yoked it to itself. So then they make Theseus the sort of overarching national hero to go over top of the 10 tribes representing the 10 districts. Within Athens here. So it's a really sort of interesting way that Theseus gets used. And I think Anderson is really right on when he sort of looks at the way Theseus was mobilized by the people who were creating this structure So we always refer to it as Cleisthenes because we love to give, great men a single individual, but it's probably a group of politicians who were all getting, there's no way you're going to get one guy is going to get this to work. You have to have a lot of buy-in to get something this radical to actually work. And so he thinks that they were basically using Theseus as a propaganda tool to get people to buy into this new democratic system by making Theseus the founder of the democracy and making Theseus the founder of this Attic superpolis for the Athenians. And that's where the labors sort of actually, the myths of the labors sort of really become prominent. Before that, you only have the Minotaur story. You don't have the labors.
Okay, so this is fascinating. And now I'm trying to think like Marathon makes sense. The Marathonian bull being one of his major, achievements. But when I think of the labors, I think of the, I just call it his serial killer walk from Treason to Athens. But that's going through, not that part of Attica that you're talking about. So what kind of, I'm trying to decide if I've misremembering what counts as his labor. So what are the Cliff's notes on what he does in the other areas that link him to this?
So I think one of the things that's really important is to look at those labors as all mini versions of Heracles' labors.
Yes. But okay, my favorite thing about that though is that he mostly just kills people and Heracles mostly kills terrifying monsters, and I think that says so much about Theseus.
But not necessarily, right? I mean, if you sort of look at what's the guy that Heracles kills with the bed, right?
No, but that Theseus kills, yeah.
Oh yeah, the bed, so there's the bed thing, right?
Yeah.
There's all. I think there's an attempt. I would have to actually spend some time. I haven't read Greg's book in a while.
I gotta buy it
but
too.
one of the stories is at Eleusis, of course, which is the major cult center.
Yeah.
Right. So Eleusis, you just have to get. Eleusis is the major competitor.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be enormous.
And it's also on the Boeotian border. And so Thebes is almost as close as Athens is, right? And so a lot of these are on the edges of Attic territory, as a way to sort of pull them into Athens and away from Boeotia, away from Thebes. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to think about the Eleusis connection being very, very important in this one. I mean, that's one of the big ones. There's the trek back from Epidaurus, because there's also the big debate over. I mean, but the Epidaurus on the way back, that's sort of part of his journey. It's also a model for Athenian behavior, right? Their biggest competitors before the 5th century are Megara, in terms of sea power, in terms of trade networks, Corinth and Megara. Right. So of course you're going to subdue those territories.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. He's going through those places, taking them down. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. This just reminds me, and I think the listeners need to know that there are, and I keep meaning to actually look into it. I've just noticed this as I've been driving that route. But now when you drive from the Argolid to Athens, there's a couple of I think they're tunnels through the mountain that they've named for some of Theseus's
victims.
I call them his labors.
There's 2 roads. There's now 2 roads. I don't know when's the last time you were on the road traveling that, but
a year ago.
Well, so there used to be what they call the old road, right, which is the one that hugs along the coast, right, and then they built the national highway, the Olympia Highway. Which is the one that burrows through the mountains. I think that just opened a few years ago.
Yeah, that's definitely what we would have taken.
Yeah, but I was in Greece for the last 10 weeks, and I was heading out to a little village called Agi Theodori, which is almost to Corinth. It's 16 kilometers from Corinth, and we have we were going on a sailboat there.
Oh, how fun!
And yeah, it's a big thing we just did. We now have a Greek sailboat.
Oh, that's so
fun! We renamed it Ino after one of the daughters of Oceanus. And the reason why we named it that is because when you have to put a call into a harbor or to anyone, you have to spell out your name, the name of your boat in the international call letters. And so we wanted one that was as short as possible.
Yeah.
So, okay, because we almost named it Medea, which we thought would have been cool, but
But Io, make it just even a little shorter.
Yeah, but we thought Io was a little too short, so we went. We thought ocean, Oceanids,
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, that one fits. I love it.
Yeah, but the road, those are the only two roads that go in to the Argolid. Like you can't get there any other way. It used to be one road, so now there are two roads. And of course, we were trying to get back out there to get on the boat by train later, and a few days later, and a fire, one of the big fires had broken out in Greece, and they closed both of the roads down, so nobody was in and out, or you couldn't get from the Argolid to Attica.
Whoa!
For like 4 days, it's just completely shut down. Yeah, so it's you think about that's a very important, highly traveled way, but it's also, those are the cities: Corinth, Megara, Athens, Aegina, right? The island of Aegina is right there. Those were the major trade competitors with each other, and so you've got Theseus traveling back from the Argolid, subduing the sort of the peoples of these regions, right? It's a purely imperialist sort of myth. Which actually is interesting because Pisistratus is probably one of the guys who helped subdue the island of Aegina, like diminish the power of the island of Aegina for the Athenians. He's often, we talk about the Pisistratids in Greek history as being tyrants and bad guys, but Pisistratus is actually looked back on mostly as a golden age. And people, the representations of him generally have the people generally in Athens being really happy to have him around. It's the other aristocrats who don't get to share power that don't like it. But his son is called is considered the bad tyrant, and it seems to be the principle of hereditary power that's the problem, not that Pisistratus gained authority. He was a military victor for them, and he brought a lot of wealth to the lower classes, and so and the middle classes. So he sort of gets a good rap. And one of the things is you see in his, sort of pieces of Theseus's mythology sort of pick up the sort of activities that were happening in the military front.
Well, yeah, and it's all about like controlling the isthmus, right? It's like if Theseus is taking that whole route and conquering everybody,
and you're knocking down your competitors, and then you're seizing control of Eleusis. You're seizing control of the Temple of Nemesis, so some major sacred sites.
Yeah,
and you are taking control of your rivals. So I think that's a lot of what's happening there.
Yeah. Oh, okay. There's just so much. One, I did not know there was a Temple of Nemesis. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, and it's actually, there's very little of it left. It's near the village. It's up in Marathon, and it's not too far from the. They did just I think I can say this out loud, but because they did announce it, they just haven't let anybody see it. A few years ago, I heard that the Greek Archaeological Survey actually found what they had been not easy to find. They had never located the Deem Center for Marathon, and they think they found it. I think they found it a few years ago, back in 2018 or something. So hopefully they're working on it. But another nearby major Deem Center is Rhamnus, which is on the coast and fortified. But the Temple of Nemesis was sort of there near Rhamnus, and near the plain of Marathon, and it was completely dismantled by the Christians because it was a major competitor for them. Like Eleusis, like Eleusis, it was, and Brauron, anything that was sort of, but Nemesis, for whatever reason, they dismantled it down to almost nothing. So that's fascinating. I never think of Nemesis as somebody who'd get a temple. I love hearing about, it reminds me of, because I went to Aegina for the first time this last trip to Athens. And it just reminds me of, of course, I'm going to forget what the temple is there, the special, unique one. Apphia. Yeah,
Thank
the
you.
Temple of Apphia.
These temples
that we do, who we don't even know what it's for.
Yeah. Yeah, just these temples where it's sort of one-offs. The idea of a temple to Nemesis is just amazing. And not like what's the intention there of a goddess like that? Anyway, fascinating. But okay, the Theseus is just, I absolutely love it. So then the foreign women aspect, now that's all I can think about, you know, seeing the Amazons as this kind of like invading foreign women force.
Yeah, and that's one of the earliest. So when they, you know, they didn't start rebuilding the Acropolis buildings until you know, they commenced with the building of the Parthenon in 447. But there was a lot of building activity in Athens starting in the 460s, and it was sponsored by Cimon, who was the son of Miltiades, who was the general who led the day at Marathon, the Battle of Marathon. And one of the most famous buildings that he sponsored, his sister Elpenike, who was the daughter of, so Cimon and Elpenike were both the children of Miltiades by a foreign woman, by a Thracian princess. And so they often had this, like Elpenike especially had this reputation for being a sort of big time party girl. And one of the other women who was well known as a big time party girl, even gets her own verb, is Corcyra, who was probably the daughter of Pisistratus. In Aristophanes' one of Aristophanes' plays, there's a character who's like, he's referred to as being Corcyrified, meaning he's like really like, you know, all into like showy luxury kind of things. But yeah, so he married Elpenike off. Miltiades dies in prison because he's in debt to the city, because the Athenians, they're never really kind to their successful generals because they're always worried that they're going to try and overthrow the democracy. So they're always sending them into exile or like something, right? So Miltiades dies in debtor's prison because he was charged 50 talents for a botched attempt to take a territory for them. And in order to pay it off, Cimon marries his sister off to like the wealthiest man in Athens, and they go on this building spree and sort of build all these buildings in the Agora. And one of the most famous is a building called the Stoa Poikile, the painted Stoa. It's famous because this is where the Stoics get their name. This is where they hung out. But it was famous because it was painted. It had these 4 paintings in the building. And then later, which I'll describe the painting in a second so you can see how this sort of works out. But then later, during the Peloponnesian War, it was this building where, when the Athenians defeated and captured a group of over 200 Spartans at the island of Sphacteria in 425, they took their shields as, you know, trophies, and they hung them on this building.
Wow.
And we have one. It's in the Agora Museum. It's very cool.
Yeah.
So the building had 4 paintings in it. 2 were mythical, 2 were historical. The first one is, and I can't remember the exact order of them, but they're sort of paired up. But the first one is the invasion of the Amazons, right? Which has Theseus and Heracles sort of fighting the Amazons. Next to it is the Battle of Marathon. And one of the things that's very interesting is that the descriptions of the painting that we have from Pausanias, who saw the paintings, describes the Persians and the Amazons as both wearing like leopard print, you know, they're given the same sort of outfits, right? And you see this also on vase paintings. And so a lot of scholars have argued, art historians have argued, that we should see the Amazon stories as an analog for the Persian Wars, which I think is you know, fine. But one of the things that's interesting about the Marathon battle is it shows the sort of protective gods and spirits sort of popping up in the corner. And so Athena, of course, pops up, and Theseus pops up. Miltiades and Cimon claim to be descended from Theseus, which is another tie-in here, which I'll explain another story in a second. But so Theseus pops up, you know, Pan is there, and they're sort of all in the background. And that's the painting right next to the Battle of the Amazon Anarchy. Then next to that is the sack of Troy, which you would think is a really weird thing to put on this building, but it also, of course, shows up on the Parthenon. But the sack of Troy shows up. But the way it's described gives you an insight as to why it is on an Athenian monument to Athenians. In the center of the painting, and again, the Trojans are described as wearing these like leopard print outfits, right? Sort of like the New Jersey housewives sort of tracksuit with a Scythian hat, and they are so again, we have Trojan War as analogy, becomes in this period analogy for Persian Wars.
Yeah.
And this is when the Trojans finally become Persianified, right, instead of being Greek, as they appear in the Homer. But the thing in the center shows the judgment of a guy named Little Ajax, or Ajax Locris.
Right.
So he's the guy who raped Cassandra on the altar of Zeus.
Right.
And it shows a trial for him, according to Pausanias.
Yeah.
And there's also a play by Sophocles that was put on around the same time as this building went up, called the Ajax Locris, which has as its central feature a trial scene of Ajax Locris. And the two people shown leading the trial are the two sons of Theseus, who are inserted into the catalog of ships as having been at the Battle of Troy.
Yeah.
So Cymon, so what's happening simultaneously is one of the things of Cymon's claim to fame is that because people don't remember that Theseus got banished at the end of his life. This is why he's living in Troezen with Hippolyta. Not with Hippolyta, with Phaedra and his son Hippolytus. He was kicked out because he killed the 50 sons of Pallas. But he had gone to the island of Skyros, where he ended up being buried after his death. And Cymon goes and reclaims his bones and brings them back and reburies them in Athens, right? He finds a supersized skeleton and brings it back because this is the only way they can, gain victory in a war, of some battle of some sort. Yeah. And so, but he does so also by laying claim to his relationship. So we have these three paintings, and they're all painted by they're painted by different people, but one of them, the Troy, is painted by a famous painter named Polygnotus, who is also very famous for his vase paintings of Amazonomachy and things. He's also good friends with Sophocles, the playwright, who put this play together, and they're all good friends with Pericles.
Wow.
But Polygnotus was also suggested that he had an affair with Elpenike, Cymon's sister.
There's so much happening. I love it so much.
Right? So it's like the what is it, the Real Housewives, real of Athens kind of
just
thing.
Just like the best
all
gossip.
But these are all the movers and shakers who are passing the laws, funding the buildings that are presenting these new mythologies. And embedding them within the Athenian imagination and literally into the landscape by putting them on buildings in the landscape. So you have all this stuff sort of going on where all of a sudden Amazons and the Trojan War all become analogies for the Persian Wars. And then you have these very specific stories that elevate the Athenians in these contexts long before the Athenians were ever considered a major player on the Greek stage, right? So I think it's and then we start seeing in the 430s, we start seeing Theseus getting stories of Theseus and his relationships to foreigners put on the stage, right? And I had mentioned in our sort of chit-chatting that the earliest vase images of Medea in Athens is her trying to poison Theseus. But that's not, what gets presented on stage. What gets presented on stage with Medea is her making a deal with Aegeus to help him, to help him have a baby, which happens to be Theseus. But doesn't talk about that story. But we see, 427 is the Hippolytus, which has his son of an Amazon, being fallen in love with his foreign wife Phaedra, who is the daughter of, who is she the daughter of? Do you know who Phaedra is the daughter of?
Minos, and Minos.
Yeah, the daughter of Pasiphae, right?
Oh,
who's the woman who had sex with a bull.
Right. The connection to the Marathonian bull, then too, right? Like just pulling it all together. Yeah.
But what's interesting about Pasiphae is so it comes up. She brings it up. She sees her love of her stepson Hippolytus, who is presented as a male Amazon, right? It isn't that he hates women and hates men. He's asexual. He actually presents himself as completely asexual and an adherent to Artemis instead of Aphrodite, right? And that's the sort of crux of the problem. Theseus is just fucking clueless the whole time of what's going on. But Phaedra brings in the story of Pasiphae as an explanation for what she sees as her corruption, her internal corruption, and her desire for unnatural love, right? The love for her stepson. And so what you see, though, is Theseus is the source of this contagion, because he's the one who brings Hippolytus with his kidnapping of the Amazon, and he brings Phaedra in it with him. So he brings these impurities and contagion, and the language of disease runs throughout that whole play to sort of represent all of their relationships to each other.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the first version that we get. And then we have Euripides' Suppliants, where Theseus is being asked to take in the children of the seven against Thebes, and he wants to reject them. And one of the things that he talks about is how he can't believe that, the root of the problem, the reason why he has this problem of the seven against Thebes, is because he corrupted his bloodline. The king corrupted his bloodline, like marrying a foreigner. And so even though Theseus, of course, is the daughter of, is the son of a foreigner.
Yeah.
Right? And so you have all of this sort of weird stuff with Theseus, where he gets to become a focal point for purity and impurity of descent, in a time period when the Athenians are struggling with their immigration laws because of the Peloponnesian War, and they are allowing children of foreign women to become citizens again. Right. So it's like, wow, there's so much going on.
Yeah. The thing that's always blown my mind about Theseus, because he is so intentionally created and like pretty heavily Athenian propaganda, that like they don't make him look that good. Like, I know a lot of it is I like read into things and I make him look worse because I think it's entertaining, and I'll admit that. But like there are so many like objectively bad parts of his story. Like, you mentioned earlier the way that Athens is like rewritten into the catalog of ships so that we can all like pretend that they were there.
Yeah.
And that's one of my...
It's Demophon and Nicomas, his sons. It's like, who are the true Democrats? Like, they're untainted by, and these are the children of Phaedra, by the way, right? But they're untainted by Theseus's crime.
Yeah, I forgot that it was his sons. Like, of course, like chronologically that makes sense. But I just had always found it so entertaining because like the only mention of Athens in the whole damn thing is in the catalog of ships, and it's like, that very much came after the fact. But the way they like wrote him into the Homeric tradition beyond that too, like with the Helen aspect, is so fascinating to me. Like I feel like, there's I imagine that it's not a coincidental connection to Sparta there, given the Peloponnesian War, but like still making him kidnap a 9-year-old girl with the intention of at least eventually quote unquote, marrying her. Yeah, like it's so wild to me.
Well, she's the most beautiful woman in the world, like already in her, in her youth. She's been targeted for greatness. But again, this is one of those things where it's like you sort of have to, is this some sort of analogy for wartime? What's going on with that? Because it's also very funny is that when Theseus is being elevated as a mythological hero for the Athenians, it's not in opposition to Sparta necessarily, though the first Peloponnesian War in the 450s is going on during some of this. But, Cimon, the guy who is funding most of these buildings, he was like a total, Sparta lover. He named his kid Lacedaemonius. Right?
Oh my God, what a
nerd. It's like a thing that you do.
That's interesting. I didn't know anyone Athenian would do that. That's amazing. That's wonderful. What a name.
Because one of the problems is that he was trying to, because the big bad for the Athenians was never the Spartans, really. It's the Thebans. Thebes and Corinth are the major, and it's really Thebes was the major enemy of the Athenians because they're all territorially butting up against each other, and they're, and Thebes and Athens are like perennially fighting over border territory. I mean, this is where the Plataeans become so important because they're in Boeotian territory, but they ally with the Athenians. The Thebans destroy Plataea not just once but twice, in historically, once during the Peloponnesian War, and then after the Spartans helped refound the city, the Thebans destroyed it again like 10 years later. And so it's this sort of continual bone of contention because Plataea, the Thebans and the Athenians are those are the real enemies. Sparta gets sort of roped in, because they are more militarily powerful in the period. And then, of course, there's Argos, who is Athens's ally, which is sort of like sitting there as
Right,
Sparta's traditional, Sparta's traditional enemy. So, no coincidence that the story of Agamemnon gets shifted from Sparta to Argos.
Yeah. Yeah, in the way that Thebes is always the bad guys. Yeah.
Because in the Eumenides, if you've got Argos as the home of Orestes, then the Athenians can play the great ally and hero by restoring Orestes to his proper position, right? And he's called a Sumakos, an ally, which is the technical term that was used for the Athenians and their alliances. So, by shifting the geography in the myth, you can make it play to an audience of to make it politically relevant at the Great Dionysia, which of course is a military and imperial showcase for Athens. And it's not a surprise. Like it turns out, I think I'm correct on this, and I don't think anybody else has really argued about it. No one seems to care about this fragmented play, the Ajax Locris, but I think it actually precedes the Eumenides as a trial scene that features Athenian characters on stage. I think it's a trend, because what the Athenians were doing in this period with their empire is they were exerting control over the islanders, in part by requiring lawsuits of certain types involving murder or high levels of funds to be tried in Athens instead of in their home territory. And so the Athenians were touting themselves as the people who bring justice and law. To places. And so now you have these like trial scenes showing up on the tragic stage, which the allies are there watching. And you have a trial being set in Troy that the Athenians there oversee. You have a trial in Athens, at the time when the Athenians are getting ready to move the treasury from Delos to Athens. They have Apollo cede legal ground to Athena and let her judge him in the Eumenides, right? So you have all this stuff going on, and all these myths are sort of colluding to praise Athens, even if they don't look like they are, Athenian rally cries. And Theseus is sort of central figure to that, but they'll find any way. The Trojan War gets roped into this whole thing, and the Athenians seem to be able to find and make any myth an Athenian national myth. And it's not about, and I think your point that they don't make Theseus look good is that's not what makes you a hero, right? Body count is what makes you a hero in the ancient world, right? You don't need to look good, but your ability to, kill is high. And doing labors on behalf of, even if you're like, this guy's bad, he like makes you fit into this bed and he either cuts off your feet or cuts off, or stretches you. He's evil. He must be brought to justice. So you have your guy do it, right? And that's how it works. It's body count. And you have the old maxim that seems to be represented in so many myths, which is, help your friends and harm your enemies, right? That's the sort of mythological tragic view.
It's the tree bender that's my favorite, I have to say. But I think the guy who kicks people into the gaping mouth of a sea turtle is a close second.
It's really funny. So my spouse is currently still in Greece, and he's on the sailboat right now. And he's trying to learn how to single hand the boat, because I'm just not going to be able to be on the boat all the time with him. And so he's practicing anchoring, and he's over in Corinth. He's sort of near the isthmus. And he anchored by this little town. And I asked him today, I was like, did you get a chance to go swimming? Because it's still like ridiculously hot over there. It's been 100 degrees for, 40 Celsius for like a month straight or something. And he's like, there are sea turtles. There are giant turtles everywhere. So he's like swimming with giant turtles in the isthmus, right?
That makes me so happy. I've never seen a turtle in Greece, but the fact that you can find them
right there.
So
when I was they're right there. I did sail training on a training boat in the Ionian Sea this summer to get my sort of certification as a crew member. And we had dolphins swimming along with us, sea turtles swimming along with us. Like, it was pretty cool. For him to be camping out with a bunch of giant sea turtles, like right around the isthmus.
That's exactly the spot. Cool. You got to watch out. Careful of those things.
But I've actually learned quite a bit about. the sort of changing my perspective about Greek history and stuff from learning to sail in the Mediterranean, because one of the things you learn is that wind matters, obviously, but sail shapes, like how fast a boat, like a modern sailboat, can only go like 8 nautical miles an hour, which is like 10 miles an hour at top speed, and this is with a modern sail, and they can actually beam reach, which is like you can take the wind on the side. An ancient sail can only take the wind from behind, right?
Yeah.
So you can sail downwind. This is the thing to think about. I think about the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, and they got to get to Crete. So if we wanted to go to Crete, you have to go to Crete during the summer because the boat goes downwind. But that means you can't sail back up. Until the winds shift, until a change of season. So they had to have been down there for quite a bit of time. And it actually is going to take quite a while. It takes 2 days basically to sail to Crete in a modern sailboat with good wind.
Yeah.
And you have to stop. You can't just, you have to stop on islands along the way. You can't just like power through because it's just open sea. And so just imagine, right? You can only sail downwind with your sail. Otherwise you have to row everything.
Yeah.
And it will take a long time. So if it takes a modern sailboat 2 days, it's going to take about 4 days with an ancient sailboat, maybe more. And then the boat has to stay there until the winds shift.
Yeah. Well, and then like also there's like, I mean, I'm trying to think of there's an enormous gap around Crete in terms of like where there are and are not islands to stop on too.
Yeah.
Like
you have to, the easiest thing to do, like, so we were thinking next summer that we'll sail down to Crete. We can get there. There's a little island that you could stop it along the way. But to get back, we're actually going to cut along the side and go up towards Rhodes. Rhodes is 65 nautical miles away. There's an island you can stop in between. So you could do that in, a 2-day sail. But you got to go up to Rhodes and then you have to come back through the Cyclades. And the winds in the Cyclades can be really tricky. So you have to sort of watch what you're doing. So I've learned a whole new respect for ancient pace of life.
So I'm always like, obviously I've talked about, I'm fascinated by the creation of the Theseus myths because it is just so different from like the, oral storytelling epic tradition that led to so many others. And I've always been really curious about the Crete aspect. And so like, do you have theories on, what role that served? And like, basically, I mean, maybe not necessarily fully the role, that's interesting too, but I'm basically curious about how much of the Theseus and Minotaur myth could be tied to like Athenian propaganda and how much was like kind of pre-existing on Crete, and then Theseus gets inserted later, or like kind of, anything to do with that.
Yeah. I mean, I am not particularly well versed in the sort of deepness of how far these myths go back, right? I mean, we have the evidence of the Theseus and the Minotaur myth in the 6th century. Maybe, I mean, it might go earlier, but I'm pretty sure we know we have it in the 6th century. We have, of course, if you go to Crete, right, and you go to the Heraclea Museum or there's the bull horns, and if you just travel around the sites, horns of consecration, as we always refer to them, sort of jokingly, right? Mountain sanctuaries with giant horns on them, right? So there's clearly, like, even if you sort of disregard Evans's rebuilding of Knossos, there's the ample evidence everywhere, right, of the bull narratives and the horns and sort of all this stuff. And so, how far back you would need. Let me give me a call to all of my Cretan Bronze Age archaeology friends who spend all their time working on this stuff. How far the actual story goes back in Crete, because that I don't know. But it's clearly evidence in the material record everywhere, as far back as the 17th century, of the sort of predominance of
the bull
iconography and the sort of bull myths and stories. So that I for sure, right, is there. How much, I don't even think they even know who Theseus is.
No.
Right? Like, it doesn't even register. It's a purely Greek thing. And it may just be, as far as I think of these older myths often as ways for upstart cities to insert themselves into the bigger stories. Right? Of the bigger stories that already exist in the Mediterranean. And Crete is something of a really interesting thing, because Crete is sort of, it's equidistant between what we call the mainland of Greece now, right, and Egypt, right? It's equidistant from Europe and Africa. It's got a lot of different stories attached to it from a very early period, and it's got one of the earliest law codes, written law codes in Greece, right? It's got it becomes well known later in time for its mercenaries, but it was clearly a major power. And there's always this story of how the quote unquote Mycenaeans attacked and took over the Minoans, but the archaeological evidence suggests peaceful integration and not conquest narrative. But we love conquest narratives. So I don't know. I think if we're going to see anything, Crete was for many centuries the major trading kid on the block. They're clearly being connected to the mainland through Phoenician merchants and others. And this is a way for the Athenians. They tie themselves to the Trojan War stories as they can, but this is a way for them to tie themselves in and maybe recognize the movement of stories, but also the movement of cult and the movement of goods and things, because clearly the amount of bull iconography that the Cretans are manufacturing, this must have been associated with them by the cities that they were trading with on the mainlands. They must have had some. I mean, they found horns of consecration on the island of Naxos, right? Like everywhere that the Cretans go, you find these. This iconography. So it's a way to sort of tie yourself in with this older strata of the region while using what you know from those places, what's familiar to you from those places, and then roping yourself in. It's another way for the Athenians to sort of like give themselves a higher status.
Yeah. No, that's
I don't think it has anything to do with sea conquest. Like the old story was like, the thalassocracy story. And I'm not sure how much we want to give to that. But Theseus is like dating every daughter of, Minos. Yeah,
well, exactly. I know that's the thing. It's like, it's always seemed like all of that to me, but then that's where the actual question of the Minotaur has always come in my head. Cause like, yes, there's bulls everywhere, but there is not like a Minotaur, so it's just kind of an interesting question.
But it may have something to do with, right. But what is one of the things that that is most well known about Egyptian culture? From the Greeks and Romans, it's hybrid creatures, right?
Yes.
And so they have hybrid gods, right? And their hybrid gods go back millennia, right? Yes. So maybe this is an influence from Egypt that people aren't recognizing because they don't want to recognize the influence and power of Egypt in the region. Is that when you find these hybrid gods, you can also almost always find analogs for them or connections to Egypt from them. So maybe that's where the Minotaur comes from.
That's really interesting. That makes a lot of sense.
But the way the Athenians tell the story, of course, is that this is a corruption.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, look, it's Crete is bad because of it.
Yeah, but I mean, like the Romans, like the Romans thought that the Egyptians, like, why do you have hybrid gods? Like this is like a really bad thing, as far as Romans were concerned. And I don't think we don't see hybrid holy people in Greek mythology either.
No, I know. That's always interested me that the Minotaur is like the singular mythological creature in Greek mythology, at least, where it's like top half animal, where he doesn't have the brain of a human, only the bottom, whereas everyone else is always like top half human and therefore like quote unquote civilized, versus. Well, I mean,
I'd be really hard pressed to make the centaurs into a civilized.
Yeah, that's why,
right? Because that's another. But this is another. The centauromachy is another one of these myths that gets put on Athenian monuments as another analog of Athenian civilizing influence of the conquest of these foreign monsters.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's also the Athenians don't care that it also shows up on Olympia, right? Like, but it's the same architects, the same artists are working on both of these structures. So this is their hallmark, right? But these are stories about, Athenian or Spartan or Greek. Generally, Greek get brought into this thing we would call Hellenic mythology of them as the sort of bringers of light and civilization. Centaurs aren't stupid, but they're not human.
I know they're interesting because they are like they are monstrous, but at the same time, I guess, yeah, like what I mean by,
I mean, they're hanging out and having dinner. They're invited to weddings.
That's the thing. They're like, they are more human. They have these human, it's almost as if they have like human thoughts and brains. They're just not good people kind of thing. They're monstrous in their actions, but I don't know. Yeah. It's interesting to, I don't know. I like all the different monsters and what they kind of may or may not mean. So, okay. The Amazonomachy, we've talked like a little bit about that. I know it was like an enormous iconographic setting, or however I should phrase that, but like that it kind of appeared on everything. And so like I don't know quite what I'm asking, but basically it seems to me that there was like a level of respect for the Amazonomachy, for the Amazons generally, but then still always depicting them as being both defeated by Athens and also this like, the foreign aspect. So yeah, I mean, is it always kind of connecting them to Persia, or
No. So Andy Stewart, who great art historian who recently just passed away. I loved him. He's a wonderful human being. But he wrote an article back. He was sort of one of the big experts on Koroi and Kore statues, the sort of maiden statues, but also Athenian red figure painting and pottery and sculpture. And he wrote an article, gosh, it might even have been in the 90s, but definitely early 2000s at the latest, on vase representations of the Amazons and the Amazonomachy. And one of the things that so what he basically argued, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You see it on every vase. Like the Amazons are represented in two ways. One, they're represented simultaneously as foreign invaders, right? They've got like the Scythian cap on, and they've got animal print leggings and everything. But over top of those animal print leggings and the animal print or like fancy designed leotard is the chiton of a Parthenos, which is the pre-married, unmarried girl who is available for marriage. Like this is the coming of age girl. And his argument was that they are simultaneously figures of fear and danger, but also desire. And so I saw a vase painting in the Vatican Museum, which he had never seen, but I think it guarantees his interpretation in some ways, because it's not just that they're wearing the guises of the Parthenoi. Sometimes they have the leopard prints and sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just have the chiton on, but that marks them as desirable, right? But in this particular vase, it's got a Greek warrior running in one direction, and he's looking backwards, and it's got an Amazon following him, chasing him, and she's looking at him as well. And it is what we call a kalos vase. So someone used this vase as a gift for someone that they thought was beautiful and that they were in love with. But the vase has kalos over the male figure and kale over the Amazon. So here you have a Greek Amazon sort of erotically charged love scene. Like they're in the middle of a battle against each other, but they're gazing at each other with desire. And this is recognized by whoever owned this pot because they chose to gift this pot as a sign of erotic affection to a beloved. So I think that there's something about, and I think this is where Hippolytus as a mythological figure stands at this focus, because the thing that is wrong with Hippolytus is his rejection of eroticism and physical love entirely. He says, I have the heart of a Parthenos in his speech. He doesn't say that he hates women. He says, I have the heart of a Parthenos. And that's going to read weird to anybody in an Athenian audience, right? But that's representing one of the desirable figures about the Amazon, because he's a male Amazon, right? He's just an Amazon in a man's body. He's a Parthenos, which makes him eligible for and should be desired for marriage, but he rejects it. Right? And so, but I think this is what the Amazon is such an interesting figure for them, is that it's not that they're an analogy necessarily for the Persian War itself. They can be used that way, but that they also, because of the gender aspect of the Amazons and what they represent, they are the sort of a locus of anxiety about a tension between fear and desire. But they're a danger, a threat to the very fabric of how Athenian social life is structured. But that in some ways makes them want them.
Yeah, it makes them so interesting. I mean, I imagine there's got to be some kind of inherent tie there too to the fact that they are women warriors, right? Like the fear of a woman in that role.
Probably. I mean, this is one of the things that makes them, like, they reject men, they reject marriage, they reject the inside and they live in the outside.
Yeah, it's like everything Athenian women can't do.
Right. The ideals for the Athenian woman are like they're the opposite, but at the same time, they embody this one element of the desired pre-wife. Right. They're sexually appealing.
I love that you've not said the word virgin once, by the way. I appreciate that. The pre-wife is such a good way of describing that.
Well, because the word so this is a problem, right? A woman, as far as we can tell in our sources, a woman doesn't become a wife officially until she gives birth to her first child.
Really? The actual birth? I mean,
that's the word, yes. So that's what stops you from, it's not having sex. That's not what makes you not a Parthenos. It's having a child. If you sort of do a deep dive into the actual uses of the words in their connotations for women, the dividing line between Parthenos and Gune is childbirth. It's not marriage itself. It's not sex. It's not sex.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I've like over the course of the podcast, I've, changed how I phrase things based on, because, 9 times out of 10 you read and in a translation, it's going to say the word virgin, like almost always. Right.
And it's wrong. I mean, but it's only wrong if you conceptualize virgin in the way that Christianity conceptualizes virgin.
Well, exactly.
If you sort of, right, if you rethink the fact, like the Greeks actually have evidence that virginity was renewable. Like it wasn't once something you lost and done, like you could like not have sex for 6 months and then you were ritually pure again to be a priestess for a cult, and so you're a virgin again. Right? It's like there are ways around that rule. And Sharon James wrote a really short sort of little study of a poem by Archilochus in this like it's like this massive 600-page companion to women in the ancient world. And she writes this like little 3-page analysis of this it's a fragmented poem by Archilochus in which he seduces the sister of like the woman who rejected him or something like that. I can't remember the whole story, but it's basically evidence that premarital sex was not out with respectable women. Like, right. Like that premarital sex wasn't the thing. Like as long as you didn't get pregnant, is like her argument is like this is evidence that having sex before marriage was not the problem.
Yeah.
Like,
it makes sense too in relation to like all the mythological stories but at the same time, it's like anytime that like it needs to kind of serve a purpose where a god, has sex with a mortal woman, like there's always going to be a child because
they have super sperm.
Yeah. Well, yes, of course. Exactly. They get to do what they want with it. But it's interesting I'm fascinated now by the giving birth aspect. Cause like I said, like I've kind of shifted my own phrasing to say unmarried and to clarify, that when you see the word virgin, it doesn't mean what we think today. It means unmarried. But now knowing that it's more about like when the actual birth takes place is even more fascinating. That feels like a very late moment.
There's actually quite a few good articles on this. I did I wrote a book review of the new Greek lexicon. Because that's what we do. We review dictionaries. But they commissioned 2 different reviews. So one of the reviewers did a sort of general look at the sort of language of the dictionary, and I did a look specifically at the language of race and ethnicity and of gender and women. Because this was one of the big things that the writers of the dictionary were really super interested in doing is updating the language around women and gender and sexuality, because that 19th century Victorian dictionary is so out of touch with they basically turned the ancient Greeks into Victorians with the way they translated these terms, and that's where that term virgin is in there. If you look at the sort of newer Greek dictionary, the new Cambridge lexicon of the Greek language, like they're much more nuanced in understanding how the word parthenos, or the word gune or palake, all these different hetaira, which everyone also translates as courtesan, but there are actually 6 different uses of the term.
Yeah.
Palake actually has like 4 different uses, one of which just means a temple attendant. It doesn't have anything to do with their relationship to men. So, when you actually do deep dives into the usages and you're not being shaded by your sort of Victorian morality, you realize that these terms have a lot more nuance. And they don't fit cleanly into our assumptions about how we want to rebuild the ancient Greeks in our image.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I brought this up recently in another conversation, when I learned that heteros is often translated as companion or like comrade.
Well, that's, heteros, right? Is your drinking buddies.
Yeah. And then
hetaira is a whore, is a high class one.
Blew my mind.
So I wrote an article on this because the criteria that people use to classify what is and isn't a hetaira, and this goes back to an article by Leslie Kirk, who was like, hetaira are courtesans. They get gifts. They don't get paid for sex. They get gifts. And a porne is someone who gets paid money for sex, right? That's very narrow.
Mm-hmm.
There are these women, they do exist, right? But there's no sort of grand horizontale demimonde hetairae, grand courtesans in 5th century Athens.
Yeah.
But women like Elpenike, who I mentioned earlier, Chimon's sister, she is probably someone who would have been called a hetaira in her own time period, but not as a courtesan. She's known to be a citizen. She's known to be a wife of like the wealthiest Callias, the wealthiest man in Athens. But she's a party girl. I mean, we have all these vases from antiquity that show women at symposia, some of them just women together. And we know that there were women only symposia. They're not called symposia. They're called a panitas. But my argument in the article was that when we see this term used in the context of a symposium, we have to be careful, because it may in fact be that what we're talking about are these wealthy Athenian women who are hanging out together and having parties with each other in the same way that their hetairoi, the male guys, are getting together and having parties together. And that this is like Corcyra, this wealthy woman who was known for partying and known for luxury. And these are publicly known figures. These are not women who weren't named. These women were named in very public spaces and shamed. There was a rumor that Elpenike and her brother Cimon were having an incestuous relationship that was circulating. She was accused of having an affair with Polygnotus the painter. But my funnest piece of evidence for Elpenike and for Corcyra both is that the Athenians had this thing that I also refer to as the anti-election, right? So every few years, you would have an election every year if you get a quorum. To ostracize, to kick somebody out of the city. So you ostracize and you kick them out for 10 years. They don't lose their citizenship. They don't lose their property, or they just have to move out for 10 years and they're not allowed back in the city. And normally you would do this if you think somebody's like getting, they're aiming at tyranny. It's an anti-tyranny law.
Right.
But it was often just used by politicians. Like we know the last ostracism to take place was like Alcibiades and Nicias were both up to be ostracized, and they got together and colluded to make sure a third person that wasn't either of them got ostracized, and the innocent guy who did nothing, right? And the Athenians were like, okay, this has like been corrupted, like we can't use this anymore.
Yeah. Right? Alcibiades, that makes sense. That checks out.
Yeah, totally, right? Totally Alcibiades thing. But Cimon gets ostracized, and so does a guy named Megacles, who's the son of Corcyra. And on the Ostracon, we have Ostracon, which are the broken pieces of pottery after which the process is named, where you carve the name of the person you want to kick out. And so Megacles has Megacles and has the father's name and has son of Corcyra. Like, you don't put the mother's name on there unless the mother's name carries a negative value for you, right? Megacles is the guy who, while he was off in ostracism land, he went and won the Olympic chariot race. Like, he's like, I don't give a fuck. Like, kick me out of the city. I've got so much money. I don't care. I can go wherever I want. And he was totally living his best life. Cymon, the one that from Chiron, it says, Cymon, son of Miltiades, take your sister. Yeah. Labon Elpanikain Ito. Taking Elpanike, go, get out. And it uses Ito, the duel. Yeah. So she's, again, named and shamed. It's like, everybody knows who Cymon is. Take your sister and get the hell out of the city. Yeah. Like, so these are the women who I think that are the originating words for the sort of negative use of this term, hetaira. Yeah. These are party girls. And so when you see later in the 4th century, these women who are sort of not available for marriage, often because they're foreign women, right. So they can't, in the 4th century, after 451, the children, if you marry a foreign woman, they can't become a citizen. There are still reasons to marry foreign women because you maybe have citizen children from your first marriage, and so right. you don't want any more citizen children. But because you have to divide the property equally. Yeah. So the property will just keep getting smaller and smaller every generation. But when they ban marriage finally in the 4th century, these foreign women are completely ineligible for marriage. But they're getting paid to come to parties and things like this. So, but those negative connotations, I think, actually root back to these like really famous, wealthy, don't give a fuck party girls. They're like the Kardashians of their generation. Yeah. I always think like Paris Hilton, in sort of her heyday.
I was just going to age myself by, suggesting Paris Hilton in like the 2000s.
Yeah. Right. Like that's sort of, and is that they were in all the if we had legal speeches from that period, we know that like friends of Pericles were charged with heresy, with sacrileges, and Aspasia was supposedly one of these people. Well, Aspasia is a wealthy foreign woman who is probably married to Pericles. Her sister was married to, Alcibiades the Elder. She's not a prostitute. She's living in Pericles' home. She's not running a brothel out of Pericles' home. Like, these are just stories that we tell to demonize these women because they don't fit into our boxes. I actually just wrote the new ancient history encyclopedia entry on Aspasia and, pulled in all the evidence to show that calling this woman a courtesan or a madam is just absolutely historically inaccurate, and you need to stop people. But she's part of this sort of mythos of these sort of wealthy elite women who were sort of functioning. They were companions of each other. Sappho, that's how Sappho talks about. She uses the word hetaira to talk about her girlfriends that she hangs out with. I mean, it makes sense. I just can't. So when you brought that up, it just like hits one of my pet peeves about bad scholarship. And
I'm thrilled to hear all of that. I mean, it's amazing. Like, so actually just last week, I also recorded with Melissa Funke, who's just written.
Oh yeah, I love Melissa.
She's wonderful. And she's got this book coming out about Frene. And so like with a lot of this is like connecting right into that conversation. Because...
I actually argued in my Immigrant Women book, I have a little tiny bit on Frene because she shows up in these courtroom discourses. I argued that Frene was not actually prosecuted. She was prosecuted because of her relationship with an Athenian man, because she had crossed the boundary that she shouldn't have crossed in this period. But she probably actually, based on the evidence we have, I think she was actually very much integrated into sort of upper class society as the priestess of a foreign cult.
Interesting.
We have evidence that she was accused in numerous documents. She's accused of bringing foreign gods into the city. And one of the things that she was the sacrilege trial that she was put on trial for was for worshiping a foreign god. But she's hanging out with like all the people that are in this context are all wealthy citizens. So she crossed the citizen foreigner boundary in a way that she shouldn't have, but she is not a prostitute. It's like, it just doesn't make sense. But she probably was associated in some ways with parties and the wealthy life, and potentially with foreign cult. But a lot of foreigners living in Athens, particularly in Piraeus, are associated with foreign cults, because foreign cults all had the Isis cult, Magna Mater. There's so many foreign gods that were brought in to Athens through the port. So a lot of them were priestesses. We have all these tombstones for priestesses of foreign cults everywhere in the Piraeus.
I want to hear everything about everyone.
That's why it's like a whole other conversation.
I know. This is like when I have to like rein myself in. I was like, oh my God, I really want to learn it all. And you've also just got like great timing. After we finish here, I'm going to record next Tuesday's episode, which I'm trying to talk about Rome a little bit, and I'm talking about Cybele, so the Magna Mater,
nice.
but in the Roman context. Yeah, it's okay. It's just
there's a really great, if you go, I don't know if it's online. I'm sure you can find a picture of it, but if you do Piraeus Magna Mater, you'll find they have the cult statue and sort of some remnants of the temple in the museum there. It's pretty cool. And then you have all of these tombstones for people who were priestesses in the cult.
That's so cool. It's so fascinating. I have to admit something. I still have not been to the Piraeus Museum, and I don't know why or how, because
you can take the metro down there now. I extended the metro.
Yeah. No, I know. I'm just the worst. I need to just do it. Yeah, next trip. There's no question. I don't know how I haven't done it already.
It's the best museum in the area. Like I think it's one of my favorite museums in all of Greece. In no small part because it has the amazing Piraeus bronzes, which you're just not going to see anything like it.
No.
But it has all these sort of like, I mean, obviously it has a lot of foreigners' tombs, which is sort of why I spend my time there.
Yeah.
But it has all these elements from the economy of the city because it's the port.
Right.
And so you have remnants of that aspect that you just don't see in other places because people weren't doing their money exchanging or their weights and measures, in the city of Athens. They were doing it when they arrived in the port.
Yeah. It's like customs. You got to do that first. Yeah,
exactly. So I just really love, and the museum's just beautifully laid out. And nice. It's just nice. It's a nice museum. It's not too big. Like you can do it.
Yeah, that's good. Every time I go to the National Archaeological, I'm just like, I can't be standing this long, but there's too much to see, and I can't.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're there, like if you're there with the American School of Classical Studies in Athens, the ASCSA, if you do like the summer session or something, like during the regular year, I guess they go like repeatedly over the year, but like during the summer session, we go like 4 times in 6 weeks for like different sessions.
Yeah.
Because you go for different things each time, and you
Yeah.
can't always predict when the pottery room is going to be open because staffing is always an issue. And so the upstairs sometimes gets shut down, so you have to like sort of time
I'm glad
it. Right?
That's never happened to me. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But we take students and we have one day to do the museum.
Yeah.
So what we did this time, there's a great cafe there, like the lower level cafe. If you've been, it's really great, and they have good tyrropita. Or casseropita, my favorite, which is the casseri cheese. But we sort of break. It's 4 hours. We do 4 hours, which is a shorter day than we do in a lot of other places. But a lot of other places we're moving around. So like we're in Delphi or we're in Olympia, and so we do museum in the morning, and then you said take a break for lunch for a couple hours, and then you meet back up, whatever. But the archaeological museum is just like, it's ridiculous. So so we just do a 4 hours straight, but we do we do the first floor, and then everyone gets a break if they want to go to the cafe. We bring granola bars for them, whatever, and then we do the upper floor. And then we just let them loose for the day, because 4 hours in that museum is more exhausting than 8 hours at Olympia.
Yeah. It's just too much. Yeah. Oh my God. And I was there like not even 2 months ago, and I'm already like, oh my God, why am I in Canada?
Yes. I mean, this is, you ask this question all the time. Like, I leave in May and I come back in July or August, I try to get back by the beginning of August so I can actually reorient myself for work.
Also it's so fucking hot. Oh my God. Okay, this is amazing. Clearly I could talk about Greece forever. I won't try to keep you for longer than 2 hours. Seriously, thank you so much for doing this. This is absolutely fascinating. I love the melding of history and mythology so much, and thank you for sharing everything.
I mean, it's really funny because when I'm an ancient historian, but I'm also a fully trained, philologist and lit scholar. And my first book was actually on the myths of Athena on the tragic stage, like plays that feature Athena, and what does it mean to have your patron goddess of your city and of your empire show up on the tragic stage in this highly politicized context. Can you separate the myth from the politics at all? Right. And so I've always been super fascinated by it. And unfortunately, like not many other people are super fascinated with it.
I am.
There's a really, I mean, I'm sure you've read Sophie Mill's book on Theseus, The Myths of Theseus.
No, I've been taking notes of books you've mentioned on this call.
Well, Sophie Mills wrote, I think, one of the best books on Theseus's story in Athens.
Oh, I'm so excited. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a great one. But she's like was writing her book around the same time I was writing my dissertation, that's my dissertation was on, and then the book just was like added Euripides. My advisor announced her retirement when I was like 4 months into my dissertation, and so I had to finish it like by the end of the following year. So I had to start to defense and graduation was 15 months, and so I was like, how am I going to do this? Oh, no Euripides. So I added Euripides for the book version. Yeah. No, I just added him in. Then I had something to revise for when I went to go write the book. But you know, there's not a lot of people who are who do this kind of historical analysis, in part because some bad people did it badly, you know, in the 80s. So like once you do it badly, everyone's like, oh, this is, you know, can't do this anymore. Yeah. But I think when you start to actually do this sort of intellectual history of Athens, or what I do, which is the German word for it is Begriffsgeschichte, the history of concepts, like justice or, you know, things like this. When you start to sort of dig into what these concepts and how they function and move, you're both in the realm of ideology, but you're also outside of the realm of ideology, because you're actually looking at the real daily manifestations of these things, and how you're looking at the propaganda as well as the sort of unintended consequences of them. And there's no way, I mean, every reconstruction of history that we make, particularly, I mean, even talking about the Greeks, right? They're a mythological group. They're not real. It's that's not how they identified themselves in the ancient world. And even if you substitute the word Hellene for Greek, Hellene is a tertiary, you know, identity for them. Their primary identity is their polis, you know, or their region, or, you know, their family. So I think that we need to be more interested in this integration of history and myth, and be less afraid to pretend we're dealing in facts when many of the facts that we deal with are in fact myths.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about when it comes to Greece, like everything is so inextricably tied, because they had this mythos that like included everything. Like one of the things I face so often when people are asking me questions about gods they've heard of somewhere or other, you know, like Nemesis is a great example. They'll be like, well, tell me everything you can about Nemesis. And I'm like, Nemesis was a concept. Like, yes, a goddess, but like a concept. And there are so many of those gods and goddesses where like what matters about them is the concept. There aren't stories for the most part that you can find and retell. And like, I can't devote an entire episode to stories of so countless gods, right? I mean, Nemesis is one of them, like, because it's more about how they tied like real life everything to a god or a goddess. And to me, that's so much more interesting than having a story to tell necessarily. But like, it also makes it very difficult when people want to understand it that aren't like, you know, deep in this.
Well, and that's all, you know, they're appealing to the you know, original meaning of the word mythos, which is a story, right?
Yeah.
But the stories, like gods have guises. Like, well, which Athena do you want? Do you want Athena Polios? You know, do you want Zeus Eleutherios? Do you want Zeus Olympia? Like they have regional identities. They have different affiliations. We often flatten out the fact that the way that the goddess Athena in Corinth is worshipped differently than the goddess Athena is worshipped in Athens. They're the same goddess, but they are worshipped very differently. You know, and you know, Aphrodite is worshipped differently in different places, and Hera, like people forget that Hera is the primary deity of Sparta, right?
Of Sparta, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, she's the primary deity of Sparta.
I was thinking,
and like one of the oldest temples we have is the Menelaon, but it was called the Menelaon, but most of the finds that we had there suggested it should be called the Helleneon, and most of the finds are then worshipped as a couple, divine couple. And you know, so we have these female deities, but Hera was the primary. The first temple of Zeus actually is the Heraion at Olympia, probably before they built the big one. But it's we don't have those stories. So you have to distinguish the gods from the myths. Like the gods that were worshipped and the gods and that are in the stories are not the same thing. But there are regional variations of the stories, because the stories were in fact used as propaganda, but they were also used simply as stories that people told for funsies. Right? It's not a flat thing. It's not one dimensional. It has all these different components and aspects to it. And this is why you can see a myth that, the story that we get from Ovid that people often think of as the paradigm. Ovid and Greek tragedy and Homer tend to be the three places that people say these are the original stories, when in fact they all contradict each other. And how can Ovid be the original version of a story about Apollo, right? Right? How much does he reflect of that story? They all want to find an version, and they want to have the correct version. And it just doesn't work that way.
Well, no. And then take into account, which I think is so, it's not emphasized enough when you're just coming at this, like picking up any old book of mythology, like also the time periods happening there. Like when you're talking about Homer tragedy to Ovid, we're talking about so many hundreds of years in between everybody that but everything about Greek mythology gets flattened, like you're saying, into this like one concept, this one like idea of a thing where it's like, no, you can't, if something's lasting 1,000 years minimum, like you can't be talking about it as if it's like one thing that has a, yes and no answer, a right and a wrong. And I love it.
But it's this sort of thing where, what is the purpose of a myth? A myth is a story that is told to convey something to the audience listening to it. And that's why there are so many different versions, because they're not monolithic audiences. And because time changes, location changes, interests change, purpose changes. So, it's a myth is only as powerful as its reception. Right? If a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, did the tree fall? If a story is told and it doesn't get picked up and repeated, by a member of the audience, was it ever told? But it's myths are vehicles for understanding contemporary existence for the people who are telling the stories. So that's what tragedy is. That's why they use these mythological ciphers. It's a way to negotiate the present by using stories that they can sort of deflect difficulties onto, right?
I just could talk about mythology forever if that isn't clear. About like the 6 years I've been doing this as just like a random person, but oh my gosh, I love conversations like this so much. So thank you so much for doing it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's so exciting. Is there anything that you want to share with my listeners about like where they can read more from you or hear more from you? I know you don't have Twitter anymore, I found, but
I quit Twitter last year, and I don't even realize that I quit Twitter sometimes. Like I forget that I was ever on Twitter.
Well, you missed all the worst of it, so you're doing great. You left before it started to explode.
I also haven't touched my blog in a year. I mean, if you want to go read a bunch of my stuff, I have a table of contents page up now, so you can find some of my greatest hits. That's everything from sort of women in myth to immigration law in Athens to modern receptions, whatever. But that's classics at the intersections. But I haven't really felt like writing on my blog in like a year. It's like 5 years of my life, and I just stopped one day and sort of didn't care anymore.
I respect that. Sometimes it just stops.
Well, I'm just finishing up my most recent book, which will hopefully be out with Johns Hopkins University Press next year by the summer. It's called Ancient Identities, Modern Politics. So a lot of the sort of myths that we've talked about today like make their appearance there, but I try to put it into the bigger context of the sort of Greco-Roman Mediterranean and how Greeks understood their own identity, how Romans understood their own identities, how we impose identities on them, and then how we use them for our own purposes in the modern world. So
okay, well, can't wait for that. That sounds fascinating.
So that's what people can look for that, but probably not for at least like 6 months to 8 months. Because
maybe I'll bring you back on to talk about it when it comes out.
I'm just finishing up the last chapter, and then once the last chapter is done, it will be ready, because everything else is completely done. Like, it's already been revised and edited.
Oh, wow.
And, everything else is polished and ready to go. It's just this last chapter, which is on 19th and early 20th century, and then sort of more modern resurgences of modern scientific racism and the use of ancient theories of identity in the building of those ideas. So eugenics and theories of evolution of civilizations, and then how we sort of are using ancient DNA to sort of bring all of that back. The Dorian invasion myth, Western civilization.
Yes, that good old term. Well, that sounds fascinating.
So this one's just trying to get it into 6,000 to 7,000 words. There's so much racism, so many racisms, and so little space.
That sounds very appropriate when talking about that stuff. Yeah.
Not enough space to. So I'm trying to it gets. You start talking about Hippocratic theories of environmental theories and but cranial formation. And how you inherit. How people shape heads, and then they it becomes heritable. And then you get sucked into 19th century craniometry, and you're like, oh my God, this is like a wormhole I didn't really want to go down. People pouring beans into skulls to decide whether a skull is of a white man or a black man or an Asian.
Oh my God.
It's and how brain the more beans, the higher the brain capacity. So this must be a white person.
Sorry, the more beans. Yeah. Wow. Oh my God. Yeah. My
favorite part though is when you got super racist guy over here who's using beans to fill skulls to decide who's white, and then you got another equally and perhaps even more racist guy over here on the other side who's look, you can't use skulls because look at these inferior savage people from the Pacific Northwest who carry their babies on flat cradles, and so their heads flatten, and this is a human intervention, and therefore skulls can't be a natural signifier. These primitive civilizations shape skulls, so it's not an objective measure of genetics.
Using racism to discount other racism.
Right? It's
Jesus.
Right. That's been my life. So for the last year. So that's why I guess I haven't written in my blog.
That's fair. Yeah. Sounds distracting. Yeah.
I'm just there are too many racisms to deal with it.
What a perfect way to wrap up the episode. Too many racisms. Oh my gosh.
It was really wonderful to be on, and we'll talk again sometime, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you so much. Oh my gosh.
Thanks, Liv.
Nerds! Thank you all for listening, as always. I love conversation episodes so much. I'm just so incredibly grateful for all the brilliant people who want to come on my show and just nerd out with me about these things, share everything that lives in their brains, and just blow my mind over and over again. And that you all want to hear them. You just want to learn all the same things as me. It's fucking magnificent. So huge thank you to Rebecca for not only coming on the show and sharing all of this fascinating history and politics and mythology and so much more, but also specifically for telling me about the sea turtles off the coast of Corinth, right where Sciron mythologically kicked his victims into the so-called gaping maws of man-eating sea turtles. We can only assume that the turtles of today, and let's be honest, the ones of the ancient world too, probably didn't have any interest in eating random people that, were walking across the isthmus. But it's cool to think about the myth of them doing it, I guess. And that they exist there now. I'm not over it. You can find more from Rebecca on her website, which I've linked to in the episode's description. Let's Talk About Myths, Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Smith is the Hermes to my Olympians. She is my assistant producer. The podcast is hosted and monetized by iHeartMedia. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Help me continue bringing you the world of Greek mythology and the ancient Mediterranean by becoming a patron, where you'll get bonus episodes and more. Visit patreon.com/mythsbaby or click the link in this episode's description. I am Liv, and I love this shit.